So a few years ago, I always have had trouble counting backwards when it comes to the dating of the Bible. And I would get confused because before the birth of Christ, it's BC, right? Before Christ. So you go from 1000 BC to 1500 BC, and you've got to go backwards with that. So 1000 to 1500 in my mind is going upward. But you get to the cross and you start going backwards. So Moses lives at 1500 BC, and Solomon lives at 1000 BC, and Isaiah is at 600 BC. And every time I would come across a number like that, I would just have to stop and think and go, okay, brain, go in the opposite direction. So I said, well, what about if we do it the other way? I'm not the first person to ever come up with this, but there's other people I found out since who have done it because it's really a practical way to date the Bible. But I did do this. This is my own work. I decided to start with Adam and make him year 0. Now, if you're counting by the calendar of dates according to what's in your margins of your Bible, that's 404 BC. That's 4,004 years before Christ. I won't go into the details, but the 4 years that were added years later because Archbishop Usher, who did the dating system, missed it by 4 years, which isn't too bad. But it's always been, okay, 4004 BC, and Christ was born in 4 BC. And so how do you get Christ born 4 years before Jesus Christ? It just goes that our calendar's off. Maybe by a little, maybe by a lot. That's a man's way of numbering it. So give or take a few years. But we're just going to go this way. We're going to start with Adam. And then the Bible says, are you in Genesis 5? It tells us that his son Seth was born when Adam was 130 years old. So you'll begin to see the system here. So year in 130, Seth is born. And then Seth has a son, and he's born in 235. That is 235 years since year 0. So we're just throwing out the BC stuff, okay? Throwing out the BC stuff. So we go on down through here and we see Adam and his son Seth and his grandson Enos, and then Canaan, Enos' son, and Adam's great-grandson was born in 325. So Adam is 325 years old when his great-grandson is born. And we keep going. So son, grandson, great-grandson, great-great-grandson, Mahilio, and Adam is 395 years when he is born. Jared, the next one, so that'd be great, 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 right? So that's Jared, who's born when Adam is 460 years old. So if we're going by dating, we're now in year 460 since Adam was created on the 6th day. And we take that to be literal. A lot of people don't. I'll say a lot of people. Many Bible teachers, particularly those who are more liberal, I guess. How do you put a word on it? But anyway, the more scholarly, the more high-minded, the heady guys, I don't hang around with them. They're going to date you by BC, but they're also not going to accept that the Lord created the earth in 6 24-hour days. I don't know if you even know people believe that, but there's hundreds and thousands of them who believe that it wasn't just 6 days, that it was ages or something, but that's just not taking the Bible for what it says. It says, and on the first day, and on the second day, and the evening and the morning were the first day, and that's 24 hours. So I've always taken it to be 24 hours. You can call me naive or what other names you want to call me, but that's okay. I'm just dumb like that. I take it for what it says. So now we're up to the 460th year and the great-great-great-grandson. Now Enoch is his son, grandson, great-grandson, great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandson. That's Enoch. And Adam is 622 years old when Enoch is born. Now Enoch has a son who's very interesting, and our study is going to focus on, and that is Methuselah. And everybody knows Methuselah. Methuselah just added another great. If you're counting with the greats, I won't keep doing it. But Methuselah is born, and Adam is 687 years old. Now we know that he lives to be 930 when we come back over here, the chart. In a perfect world, this chart would just keep going, but I ran out of room. So this line picks up where this one leaves off. Are you with me? So he's 687 years old when Methuselah is born. One of the mistakes that I used to make in my Bible reading is when it says in Genesis 5, for example, it says, and Adam lived 130 years and begat a son in his own likeness after his image and called his name Seth. And the days of Adam after he begotten Seth were 800 years, and he begat sons and daughters. And the days of Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. Now what I've done in the past is when it says, and he died, I killed him off. Okay, he's dead. But he's still alive when Methuselah's born. See, he didn't die back here. The Lord just took his figures and said, okay, he lived 930 years, but when you lay it out, you're going, wow, he knew Lamech. He was 874 years old when Lamech was born, the son of Methuselah. That's Enoch's grandson. And so Lamech is born, and don't you know if you're Lamech, you're going to want to know your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandpa who was in the Garden of Eden. If you get old enough to know him, and so he lived 870 to 1930, that's 60 years. He's about 60 years old when Adam dies. You ever thought about that before? So this guy saw his genealogy, and I bet the last few years of Adam's life was just sort of sitting around waiting for kinfolk to come by. Because everybody would want to meet him. Would you have to make appointments? Because you're going to have billions of people by this point on the earth. All of them being able to call Adam Pops, Grandpa, Daddy, whatever you call him, Granddaddy, whatever you call him, Dad. What did you call your grandpa? Papa, your great-grandpa. And it probably just goes on. You know, you get that name and it just sort of sticks and all your grandkids call you that. So here Adam dies in 930, and then 57 years later, Enoch is raptured. So Enoch knows Adam and grieves when Adam dies because 622 to 930 is nearly 300 years. And we know he was 365 years old when the rapture took place. And you take the numbers, you take 622 and 987, and subtract 622, it's going to come to 365. So that's how old he was. So then you can begin checking these numbers and saying, okay. So in the 987, we've gone nearly a millennium, and Adam is the first one to die. Now we hit a streak here. Seth dies, that's his son. He dies in 1042. And of course, Seth sees his son, grandson, great-grandson, great-great-great-grandson disappear. He sees his son disappear. He sees his grandson disappear. He sees his great-grandson disappear. Now put yourself in their shoes. Where's Enoch? Well, we can't find him. Well, don't you think we ought to be looking for him? And they did look for him. According to Hebrews chapter 11, and he wasn't found. Now, we know what happened, and of course they found out what happened. He went to be with the Lord. I don't know how long it took him to figure that out. Maybe the Lord told him. The Bible's silent about it. So then Seth dies in 1042, and then Noah is born in 1056. So Enos is alive when Noah is born. That's the grandson of Adam is alive when Noah is born. So don't kill these guys off when it says in verse 5, and he died. In verse 8, he died. It says it every 3 verses. Verse 11. Look at me. See if I'm right. Look at it. At verse 11. And he died. Verse 14. And he died. And it keeps going. What happens in verse 20? Do you see and he died in verse 20? What happens in verse 23? One of them's Enoch. Enoch disappears. It just breaks the pattern. It's and he died, 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 and he walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. And then it picks up again, and it gets at a pretty good pace here. Noah, I've got in black the births. So Noah is born, and Noah's sons, Ham and Japheth, are born in 1556. Shem is the youngest. He's born in 1558. And I'm talking about from year zero, right? If you look at this in the same way that we date our time, so we're in the year 2023. So we're out there in this direction for the cross, about the same distance that Abraham was from the cross, going backwards. Okay? Everybody still with me? So Enos dies in 1140. That's from Adam's birth. Canaan dies. Here we go. Canaan dies. Mahalalel dies. Jared dies. Then Ham, Japheth, and Shem, likely twins. Even though they're named all three together, the Bible tells us, it's sort of an obscure verse, but the Bible tells us that Shem is 2 years older than these two. Now you got to read to find that, but the Bible describes it. So we put him at 1558. Then Lamech dies. Okay, so we have Adam dead, Seth dead, Enos dead, Canaan dead, Mahalalel dead, Jared dead, Enoch disappears, Methuselah still living, and Lamech dies right here. Now watch that. Watch that. He's the first dad to see his son die. Because up to that point, all of them have lived to bury their dad, except Methuselah. Now, Methuselah is no young chicken when Lamech dies, because Methuselah dies, and this is 1651, and Lamech dies in 1656. So he dies 5 years after Lamech. So we take that, do the math. If Methuselah lived to be 969 years old, when he's 964, his son dies. That could have been easy. And I'm sure it seemed everybody suffered a loss when Enoch died. Even his son, and even his grandson, they're alive to watch him disappear. But then Methuselah dies in 1656. Now that's the same year as the flood. Because Methuselah means when he dies, it will come. That's what his name means. When he dies, it will come. So he was a living witness that something's going to happen whenever Methuselah dies. From time to time, we'll hear on the news, or it'll be the internet now, you'll read on there, the oldest man in America died, or the oldest man in the world died, 120 years old, somewhere over in usually Asia, because all they do is eat rice all their lives, and they weigh about 75 pounds, and their hearts are like trains, and they just run forever. Of course, you look at them, they sort of look like they're washed up by the time they're 120, but God bless them. I looked up washed up at my age, so I can't make fun of anybody. But when Methuselah dies, it makes news. Now, Noah is born here in 1056, and his grandpa dies. Well, his great-great-great-grandpa, figure it up, his great-great-grandpa dies in the 600th year of Noah's life. That's the same year he built the ark. See the numbers? 600 years. You see that in the math? It's real easy. Easy math. The 600th year. So they've known, the Lord told Noah for 120 years to build that. So if Methuselah is 969, just go back at 869, at 859, at 849, when Methuselah is 849 years old, Noah comes to his great-great-great-grandpa, figure it out, and says, God's told me to build an ark. Why? He's going to send a flood. Oh, well, you better get to building. What's going to happen this flood? Everybody's going to be flooded out. Everybody's going to die. You see why God began letting all these people die? Because they're not going to be drowned out in the flood. The ones that are going to survive, the only ones that are going to survive, are Noah's sons and their 3 wives. Lamech died in 1651, 5 years before the flood took place. And when Lamech dies, things are so bad in society, God says, there's no hope. We got to kill them all. There's no hope. That happened in 1,600 years of creation. 1,600 years in our date, well, your King James Bible was written in 1611. Gives you a little timeline. 1,600 years, well, I guess by the way we measure time, it's quite a long time. Because I want you to see, compared to Methuselah's life, our life. So here's our life. You live about 650,000 average. 650,000 hours on average. The average as of last year is 79.11 years is the average age. Now we know some people that live to be, my mom, 93. We know people who have lived that long, and you're a pretty good age and you still feel pretty good and feel like you're going to make it a few more years. And if you've beat 79, then you beat the average. But you've been asleep for 27 years. You say, how do you know that? Well, you take 8 hours a day. That's a third of your life. When I had the teenagers in psychology, those 15-year-olds will walk in, and when I began talking about sleep, I said, would any of you like to guess how many years you've been asleep? And when I'd say, oh, you've been asleep 5 years. What? Yeah, you've been asleep 5 years. I'm 60, I've been asleep 20 years. I've been asleep more than you've been alive. I mean, it increments, we just do it a little by little, night by night. We don't think about it, but the hours add up. So here we are, 79 years versus 969 years. So that may put me to thinking about Methuselah and how many children he had and how many grandchildren he had. How many great-grandchildren he had. I wonder how many Adam had. Because it says right there, right, he had sons and daughters. Where did Cain get his wife? Well, it had to be his sister. Don't let that trip you up. People think they're going to trip you up. What they mean by that, well, there must have been another race. Well, that's just dumb. You do err not knowing the scriptures. Because Adam married his sister. Didn't he? And Abraham married his sister. And that's 2,000 years after Adam. So there was nobody else to marry. He married one of his sisters. Now that probably grosses you out. And Leviticus chapter 19 outlaws it and says you can't do it. But up till the end they could. Isaac and Jacob were first cousins. So, it just happened. Well, so I figure, okay, old Methuselah dies, and theoretically, this is all theoretical, this is all math, but I want to wow you with some numbers. So let's say Methuselah, theoretically, this didn't happen because the flood took place and everybody got drowned out, but let's just go theoretically. Let's put 500 people passing his casket, one on each side, so they're in 1,000 ranks. So 1,000 people pass his casket at a time. 500 going that way and 500 going that way. And they pass his casket to take a look. Now, don't get too deep in the weeds and say, well, that's ridiculous. I'm just giving you an illustration to show you something. So they pass 1,500 on each side, and they pass at 2,000 ranks per hour. So every hour, you've got 2,500 ranks passing, or 1,000 ranks passing by, 2,000 an hour. And they do this for 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. We're going to give them Sunday off. Are you with me so far? I've got it written down so you can sort of keep the numbers in your head because they get all jumbled. 1,000 pass, 2,000 ranks an hour, 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. We give them Sunday off. And we're not going to make everybody pass. We're just going to hold these numbers to 80%. 80% of the people pass. Okay? 80%. We're going to say the other 20%, they're too old, or they went fishing, or they're too young. So we're only having 80% of the population pass. Now, how do we determine the population? Well, that comes over here. If Mr. and Mrs. M's, he lived 969 years. We don't know how long his wife lived. We don't know how many wives he had. We know Jacob had 4. But let's just say we're going to hold it simple. Mr. and Miss Methuselah, one man, one woman, start having their babies when Mr. and Miss Methuselah are 20 years old. And every 20 years, it doubles. That makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, I got married about 20, and by 40, I doubled myself, quadrupled myself actually, but me and my wife had doubled ourselves. We were 2, and now there's 4. And if that keeps doubling and doubling and doubling and doubling, and you know it's going to, I mean, how many times you read in the paper, depending on how many kids you have, well, she had 10 children and 35 grandchildren and 93 great-grandchildren and 162 great-grandchildren. You know, it just goes on and on and on and on. I had 4 myself, now I've got 11 grandchildren. So let's just, are you with me? So Mr. and Miss Methuselah get married at 20, and at age 20 they start having babies. Now, we're just going to let them have one baby rather than, no twins, no triplets. Just, they're doubling themselves every 20 years. So their kids get to be 20 and they have babies. And then those kids get to be 20 and they have babies. And then those 20 get to have babies and they have babies and they have babies and they have babies. It's possible that in Methuselah's lifetime, he could have doubled 47.4 times. Do you know how many descendants he had? I know you can't guess because I would have never guessed. But here's the number. Where can I write it? 393 trillion. 393 trillion. Now we're just letting 80% pass, right? And if we let 80% pass, we're now about 4,600 years since the funeral procession began. They're still passing. And you know how long they'll pass? 49,000 years. Those numbers blow your mind? You take that number right there, and you divide it by 8. Let's make it 8 billion. Because that's how many people are in the world right now. 8 billion. Based upon that math formula, you could have enough people to fill 191 Earths. 191 more Earths like this one with a population of 8 billion. That'll get you to 393 trillion. I didn't trust my numbers, so I called a guy in Ohio who's a genius in math, and I worked the numbers, and I said, does this all work out? And he said, you got it. Numbers are right. Nothing wrong with the numbers. So let's go with this premise, and I've asked you this before, but let's go with this premise just for the fun of it. What if man hadn't sinned? Because that was the original plan. The original plan was for Adam and Eve to be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and never die. Correct? But we ruined it. We sinned, and therefore we die. And so we start reading right here. Here begins the drumbeat. Died, 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 and a whole bunch of people died right here. How many people? Don't think of them as Neanderthals and with the clubs beating each other in the brains. These are people who are living to be 500 and 600 and 700 years old. In that population who died in the flood, there were 20-year-olds and 200-year-olds and 500-year-olds, and they were all the descendants of Adam, and they were all the descendants of this line because it's the only line. Now, Cain married and had kids going that way. We're just following the line of Christ here. That's just Methuselah. The Bible just drops Cain off about Genesis chapter 4 and leaves him. So we don't know what happened with his line, but you know what happened? They multiplied. They had kids, and they had kids, and they had kids, and they had kids. So how many people died in the flood? There's no telling. But back to my premise. Let's turn to Isaiah. And I want you to get Isaiah chapter 9, 6. And this is talking about Jesus Christ. Now let me back up one more time and punt. Okay? We're going to go through it one more time. All these people are being born. Theoretically, all these people are being born. And they're all having children. We know Seth was not Adam's only child. He had Cain. And then the Bible says he had sons and daughters. The daughters are never mentioned. Now we only have Enos. But read it. He had sons and daughters. Sons and daughters. Sons and daughters. We've only got one. But how many sons did he have? Well, he could have had 200. Easy. 2,000 maybe. You're living to be 900 years. There's no sickness to kill anybody. By the way, trivia question. Do you know who the first person in the Bible to get sick? First person mentioned getting sick in the Bible? It's an interesting question. Now, do you want an answer or do you want to look for it? Now you tell me, you want the answer or you want to look for it? You want the answer? It's Jacob. Jacob. First one to get sick. You know where the first war is in the Bible? A lot of people die by war. First war in the Bible is in Genesis chapter 14. That's the time of Abraham. Abraham's in that battle at the end. Well, what about that? That's 2000 BC. You mean they went 2,000? I don't know. I'm just telling you what the Bible evidence is. Did they go to the time of Jacob, which was, what would that be? 1800 BC? Was that the first time anybody ever got sick? So you lived 2,200 years without sickness? No wonder they're living to be as long as they are. There's no sickness. There's no disease. There's no environmental problems. You hadn't start putting stuff in the air that you breathe and then it destroys your lungs. Nobody, I don't guess, is smoking. That kind of thing, whatever it is, eating Little Debbie's I don't know, driving through McDonald's. Who knows what they had? Good grief, they could have been flying planes in those days. They were living so long. But my point is, they keep growing and multiplying and growing and multiplying and growing and multiplying. If there was no sin, they'd still be alive. Would Adam still be alive if he hadn't ate of the fruit and rather had eaten of the tree of life? Would he still be alive? Yes. How old would he be? He'd be 6,000 years old, give or take. 6,000 years old. And how much longer is he going to live? Forever. That's plan A. That was plan A. And then we know what happened. Man took the fruit, ate it, and God said, in the day you eat thereof, thou shalt surely die. And he died in the spirit immediately. It wasn't that God was a liar. He died that day in his spirit, but eventually he wore out and his body died. Now that's a blessing. Because if he couldn't have died, he'd have been stuck in that sinful body still 6,000 years later. Can you imagine what he would look like after sin had ravished his body for 6,000 years? Have you seen anybody that sin has ravished their body? And you look at them and say, how old are you? You would just, if you were to guess, you'd say, man, they got to be 70. And he tells you and says, I'm 45. Oh, what happened to you, man? Well, drugs, rough living. My mom tells me the story that her mother-in-law, which would have been my grandmother on my mom's side, she said that within like a month, if I'm getting the story right, doesn't matter, she's not around to correct me, but if I remember right, my grandpa's brothers, so this would be my grandpa's mother, my great-grandmother, had one son murdered off on Catoosa somewhere in Morgan County. They found him dead, never solved the murder. Sitting under a tree, somebody come along, murdered him. And then within a month, she had a son fall off a streetcar in Birmingham, cut his head off. And my mom said her hair turned white overnight. You ever know anybody like that? What is that? Stress? Pain? You know, we get these lines. I got this one right here. See that right there? Now I wish I could fix that. Botox, something. Oh. Wish I could fix that. Well, I can't. You know what that is? It's because I've looked like this too long. You know what that look is? It's either thinking or worrying, fretting, something. But that thing's grown in there and it's deep, 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 deep. So if you still got your no wrinkles, and just thank the Lord and take care of it because they're going to come. Just a matter of time. That's what death does to us. But what if you never sinned? So what happens? Does God have a plan? We'll close here. Isaiah 9:6. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. Watch. And the increase of his government and peace, there shall be no end. There shall be no end. The increase, no end. The increase, no end. It will never end. 393 trillion? Well, that'll be the kindergarten class. That'll be third grade. When you get the population going and everything right, that's where we're headed according to Revelation. A new heaven, a new earth, a new heaven, a new earth, and a new Jerusalem. Well, where's the New Jerusalem? What's that for? That's for Christians. That's the born again. That's the bride of Christ. That's for you who live in this age of grace. You are a very unique group of people, and you are blessed. Who's the earth? The earth is for the Jews. God promised them the land. He told Moses, he said, you take your shoes off your feet because this is holy ground. This isn't holy ground. Good ground. Probably go to good cops. But it ain't holy ground. That's why we've grown up all our lives and call it the Holy Land. You want to know what God and the devil is fighting about? Just like what everybody else fights about. A piece of property. It's a property dispute. And it's about Jerusalem. So the Arabs claim it. There's the devil's crowd. And the Jews claim it. And there's God's crowd. And one day that will be settled. And I can tell you how it's going to be settled. According to Revelation chapter 11, there's going to be a throne set right there in Jerusalem. And it will be Jesus Christ. King of kings and Lord of lords. And here we go. Fast forward. Let's say, let's be a little conservative. Let's say we're out there 500 trillion years. If we can even measure it by years then. It's hard for me to keep up with what day of the week it is. But you get out there to 500 trillion years, and you're going to be reading. You're going to hear the announcement says, well, Jack and Jill are getting married today, and everybody's invited, RSVP. And you'll get another note, and it'll say, Jack and Jill are the proud parents of twins born today. And that's going to go on forever, and ever, and ever. And that thing out there, when you look up at the stars tonight, man, I get to gaze at that sometimes, and I think, Lord, you made that to be populated. That's what it's for. And so what's happened here is we've thrown things off a little off kilter here. And so the Lord's isolated this place and fixed this place and come down and paid for his son's life for our sins. And he's going to eradicate that and get that fixed. And then there'll be no more sorrow and no more crying and no more death. And you'll live forevermore. You go over there to Revelation chapter 22 and it says, and what's going to happen? Those people will eat of the tree of life. That's Revelation 22:14. They'll eat of the tree of life and live forever. Just like he planned in Genesis chapter 2. And there'll be no more mess-ups. And there'll be no more devil. For he's in the lake of fire burning forever and ever. And there you go. God's story, all found in this guy named Methuselah. And he's the oldest man who ever lived for a reason. So we'd stop and go, well, let's think about that guy for a few minutes. Wonder what we can learn from him. It's quite remarkable what we can learn from him. How to date, and also to consider time and population.